Edward Williams, a human soldier stationed on the Voth homeworld, had no idea that defeating a reptilian warrior in combat would result in 5 gorgeous Voth females becoming his wives. The obscure law lurked in the depths of Voth tradition, waiting to be triggered by an unsuspecting alien. The training exercise seemed routine. Edward faced off against Sagan, a respected Voth warrior, in what was meant to be a friendly match. Sweat beaded on Edward's brow as he circled his opponent, muscles tense and ready. Sagan's scales gleamed under the harsh lights of the combat arena. In a flurry of strikes and counter-moves, Edward managed to pin the Voth warrior, earning victory. Cheers and surprised murmurs erupted from the onlookers. Edward helped Sagan to his feet, both combatants panting from exertion. Neither realized the far-reaching consequences of this seemingly innocuous bout. Within hours, the Voth High Council convened an emergency session. The chamber buzzed with agitation as council members debated the unprecedented situation. A human had invoked their sacred mating laws. Tradition demanded action. "We must uphold the ancient ways," declared the eldest council member, his voice gravelly with age. After heated discussion, the decision was made. 5 young, genetically superior Voth females were selected for the mandated unions. Their names were recorded and sealed, their fates now intertwined with the human soldiers. Edward sat in his commanding officer's office, confusion etched on his face as he received the news. "You're telling me I have to marry 5 Voth women?" he asked, voice incredulous. His CO nodded grimly. "It's a matter of diplomatic importance, Williams. We need to comply with Voth customs to maintain good relations." Edward's mind reeled. He thought of the ethical implications, the potential cultural conflicts, but orders were orders. Meanwhile, in a sterile Voth laboratory, scientists prepared for a battery of tests. They needed to determine if human Voth reproduction was even possible. Genetic sequences scrolled across screens as they worked, the fate of 2 species potentially hanging in the balance. The 5 chosen Voth females gathered in a private chamber, their reactions a mix of emotions. Lyrana, the eldest, regarded her scaled hands with newfound fascination, wondering how they would feel against soft human skin. Zira, the youngest, paced nervously, her tail lashing behind her. "How can they expect us to mate with a mammal?" Zira spat the word like a curse. "It is our duty," Lyrana replied calmly, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. As news spread, the Voth capital erupted in chaos. Traditionalists took to the streets, praising the adherence to ancient laws. Progressives gathered in protest, decrying the forced unions as barbaric. Edward found himself at the center of the storm. He stood at the window of his quarters, watching the unrest unfold in the alien city below. The weight of his new role pressed down on him. He was no longer just a soldier, but a reluctant diplomat, thrust into a position that could reshape human-Voth relations forever. 5 marriages loomed on the horizon, each one a step into uncharted territory. Edward took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. He had faced down enemy fire, but this might be his most daunting mission yet. Edward's world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. As he stood at the window of his quarters, watching the unrest unfold in the alien city below, a sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. "Soldier Williams," a gruff Voth voice called out. "Your presence is required at the medical facility." Edward took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. He had faced down enemy fire, but this might be his most daunting mission yet. As he stepped out into the corridor, he was flanked by 2 towering Voth guards who escorted him through the winding streets of the capital. The medical facility loomed before them, a sleek structure of metal and glass that seemed to pierce the sky. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and an underlying musk that Edward had come to associate with the Voth. Dr. Thera, a female Voth with striking amber eyes, greeted him at the entrance. "Human Williams," she said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and clinical detachment. "We have much to learn about your physiology." Over the next several hours, Edward underwent a battery of tests. Blood samples were drawn, his reflexes tested, and his body scanned by machines he could scarcely comprehend. Through it all, Dr. Thera watched with rapt attention, her clawed fingers dancing across holographic displays, as she absorbed every piece of data. "Fascinating," she murmured, examining a readout of Edward's genetic structure. "The similarities between our species are unexpected." As Edward lay on the examination table, he couldn't help but wonder about the 5 Voth females who were to become his wives. Were they undergoing similar tests? How did they feel about this arrangement? His questions were answered sooner than expected. In an adjacent lab, separated by a transparent barrier, Edward caught glimpses of scaled figures undergoing their own examinations. 5 Voth females, each unique in coloration and demeanor, submitted to the probing and scanning of the medical staff. Dr. Thera noticed Edward's gaze. "Your potential mates," she explained. "Zira, Ellie, Nyota, Neytiri, and Topol. They represent the finest genetic stock of our clans." Edward watched as the females were administered injections, their bodies briefly convulsing as the treatments took effect. He noticed subtle changes in their appearance, scales softening, features becoming less angular. The sight filled him with a mixture of fascination and unease. Outside the medical facility, the city was in turmoil. News of the impending unions had spread like wildfire, igniting passions on both sides. Edward could hear the distant chants of protesters, their voices a cacophony of anger and fear. "Protect our bloodlines," one group shouted, while another countered with cries for progress and unity. The tension wasn't limited to the Voth homeworld. Edward's commanding officer entered the medical bay, his face grim. "Williams, we've got a situation brewing. Earth's in an uproar over this. Human rights groups are calling it a violation of your basic freedoms." Edward absorbed the news, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a soldier, but a reluctant diplomat thrust into a position that could reshape human-Voth relations forever. As the days passed, Edward's life became a whirlwind of medical tests and cultural training. He spent hours poring over Voth customs, struggling to memorize complex social hierarchies and mating rituals. The information was overwhelming, alien concepts clashing with everything he had known. "The Voth value hierarchy and tradition above all," his cultural advisor explained. "As the male, you will be expected to lead your household, but always in accordance with Voth law and custom." Edward's head spun with the implications. How could he lead a household of a culture he barely understood? His first meeting with one of his prospective wives came sooner than he expected. In a room designed to blend human and Voth aesthetics, Edward found himself face-to-face with Zira, the youngest of the 5. Zira's scales shimmered with an iridescent quality, her eyes a deep violet that seemed to pierce through Edward. She approached cautiously, her tail swaying behind her, in what Edward had learned was a sign of nervousness. "Human Edward," she said, her voice softer than he had imagined. I am honored to meet you." Edward smiled, trying to put her at ease. "The honor is mine, Zira. I hope we can get to know each other better." As they talked, Edward found himself drawn to Zira's quick wit and curious nature. She asked him about Earth, her eyes widening as he described oceans and forests so different from the Voth homeworld. Their meeting was cut short by the arrival of Ambassador Simpson, newly arrived from Earth. The ambassador's face was etched with concern as he pulled Edward aside. "We're working on a diplomatic solution," Simpson whispered. "A trial period before any permanent unions. It's the best we can do for now." Edward nodded, grateful for any reprieve, however small. As he turned to bid farewell to Zira, he caught sight of Dr. Thera rushing into the room, her eyes alight with excitement. "Ambassador Human Edward," she called out, "I've made a breakthrough in my research. The potential offspring of human Voth unions. They could possess abilities beyond anything we've seen in either species." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Edward looked from Dr. Thera to Zira, then to Ambassador Simpson. The future suddenly seemed more uncertain than ever, filled with both promise and peril. Unknown to them all, another player had entered the game. In the shadows of the Voth capital, a group of humans moved with purpose. Led by the steely-eyed Colonel Kurtz, the Terran First operatives prepared to make their move. "Soon," Kurtz murmured, his gaze fixed on the distant medical facility. "Soon we'll show these lizards the true might of humanity." As night fell on the Voth homeworld, Edward lay awake in his quarters, his mind racing with the events of the past few days. 5 marriages loomed on the horizon, each one a step into uncharted territory. The fate of 2 species hung in the balance, and he was at the center of it all. As dawn broke over the Voth homeworld, Edward found himself being escorted to a new facility on the outskirts of the capital. The building, a sleek fusion of Voth and human architecture, loomed before him, a physical manifestation of the unprecedented union he was about to undertake. Dr. Thera greeted him at the entrance, her amber eyes gleaming with scientific excitement. "Human Edward, we're ready to begin the controlled mating experiments," she announced, her tail swishing with terrifying enthusiasm. Edward swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "I understand," he managed, following her into the building. The interior was a maze of high-tech equipment and specially designed chambers. Dr. Thera led him to a viewing room overlooking a large enclosure filled with lush vegetation and swirling mists. "We'll start with Zira," Dr. Thera explained, gesturing to the primordial swamp-like environment. "This chamber replicates the ancient breeding grounds of our species." Edward nodded, his heart racing as he spotted Zira entering the chamber from the opposite side. Her scales glistened in the artificial light, and her violet eyes sought him out nervously. As they entered the humid environment, Edward felt the oxygen-rich air fill his lungs. The warm mist clung to his skin, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Zira approached him slowly, her tail swaying in what he now recognized as a sign of anticipation rather than nervousness. "Human Edward," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. The contact sent a shiver through both of them. What followed was a dance of discovery, as Human and Voth explored each other's bodies with a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing attraction. Dr. Thera's voice occasionally crackled through hidden speakers, offering guidance and collecting data. Hours later, exhausted but successful, Edward emerged from the chamber. Dr. Thera's team swarmed around him, collecting samples and taking readings. "Remarkable," Dr. Thera muttered, reviewing the data. "The genetic material exchange was far more efficient than we anticipated." As Edward was led to a recovery room, he caught sight of Ambassador Simpson in deep discussion with a group of Voth officials. The ambassador's face was a mask of diplomatic neutrality, but Edward could sense the tension in his posture. Days blurred together as the experiments continued. Each session brought new challenges and discoveries. The temperate forest setting for his encounter with Ellie proved initially challenging, their bodies struggling to find harmony in the unfamiliar environment. "Adjust the hormonal treatment," Dr. Thera ordered her team as she observed the difficulties. "Increase the pheromone output for both subjects." The modifications worked, and soon Edward and Ellie found their rhythm, their bodies adapting in ways that astounded the observing scientists. Between sessions, Edward caught snippets of the political storm brewing around him. Protests on Earth and the Voth homeworld grew louder, the airwaves filled with heated debates about the ethics of their union. During a brief respite, Ambassador Simpson pulled Edward aside. "We're making progress," he said in a low voice. "The High Council is considering a probationary period for the marriages. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Edward nodded, too drained to fully process the implications. His mind was occupied with thoughts of his next encounter, Nyota, the warrior caste female. The arid chamber designed for their meeting was a stark contrast to the previous environments. Sand crunched under Edward's feet as he entered, the hot air sapping his moisture immediately. Nyota burst into the chamber like a sandstorm, her eyes flashing with challenge. She circled Edward, muscles coiled and ready to strike. "Prove your worth, human," she snarled, lunging at him. What began as a battle transformed into a passionate encounter that left them both breathless and grudgingly respectful of each other's strength. As the experiments progressed, Edward found himself forming genuine connections with his Voth brides-to-be. Zira's curiosity and gentleness touched him deeply, while Nyota's fierce loyalty awakened something primal within him. These growing feelings complicated his already tumultuous emotional state. He was a soldier, bound by duty, yet he couldn't deny the bonds forming between him and these extraordinary beings. Dr. Thera's excitement grew with each successful mating. "The genetic adaptations we're seeing are unprecedented," she explained to Edward and Ambassador Simpson. The potential offspring could possess abilities beyond our wildest expectations. As they prepared for the fourth experiment with T'Pol, the reserved scientist, an undercurrent of tension ran through the facility. Edward couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He was just stepping into the new chamber, designed to replicate T'Pol's preferred environmental conditions, when a deafening alarm shattered the controlled atmosphere of the facility. Red lights flashed as panic erupted in the corridors outside. "Intruder alert! Security breach in sectors 3 and 4!" A voice boomed over the intercom. Edward's military instincts kicked in. He rushed to the chamber's exit, only to find it locked. Through the observation window, he saw chaos unfolding. Dr. Thera was shouting orders as her team scrambled to secure their data. In the distance, he heard the unmistakable sound of explosions. Trapped in the chamber with T'Pol, Edward's mind raced. Who was attacking? What were their motives? As the facility's lights flickered ominously, he realized that the delicate balance they had been building between humans and Voth was now under threat. In the control room, alarms blared as systems failed one by one. Dr. Thera fought to maintain control, her claws flying over the emergency protocols. "We're losing power to the life support systems," she yelled. "We need to evacuate the mating chambers immediately." As smoke began to fill the corridors, Edward knew that the next few moments would determine not just his fate, but the future of human-Voth relations. With T'Pol by his side, he prepared to face whatever threat had breached their sanctuary. The deafening alarms continued to blare as Edward's mind raced, assessing the situation. Suddenly, the chamber plunged into darkness, leaving him and T'Pol momentarily disoriented. Emergency backup systems kicked in, bathing the corridor outside in an eerie red glow that seeped through the observation window. "We need to get out of here," Edward said, his military training kicking in. He searched for an emergency release mechanism, finding it hidden beneath a panel near the door. With a grunt, he pulled the lever, and the door slid open with a hiss. As they stepped into the corridor, they were met with a scene of chaos. Scientists and security personnel rushed past them, their faces etched with panic. Through the commotion, Edward spotted Dr. Thera barking orders to her team. "Secure all genetic samples and experimental data," she shouted, her tail lashing with agitation. "We cannot lose our research." Edward quickly made his way to her, T'Pol close behind. "Dr. Thera, what's happening?" The Voth scientist's amber eyes locked onto him. "We're under attack. The main power core has been sabotaged. We're operating on emergency systems." A distant explosion rocked the facility, sending tremors through the floor. Edward's combat instincts took over. "We need to gather the others and find a secure location." As if on cue, Zira, Ellie, and Nyota appeared, having escaped from their respective chambers. Edward felt a surge of relief seeing them unharmed. "Edward!" Zira called out, her violet eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" "We're under attack," he explained quickly. "We need to move, now." Edward's mind worked furiously, formulating a plan. He turned to Dr. Thera. "Doctor, you and your team need to focus on preserving the research. It's crucial we don't lose what we've discovered." Dr. Thera nodded, her scientific drive overcoming her fear. "Agreed, but we'll need protection." Edward looked at the Voth females, assessing their abilities. "Zira, T'Pol, I need you to assist Dr. Thera. Your knowledge of Voth technology will be invaluable in securing the data." Zyra and T'Pol nodded, moving to join Dr. Thera's team. "Nyota, Ellie, you're with me," Edward continued. "We need to defend against the intruders and buy time for the others." Nyota's eyes gleamed with a warrior's anticipation. "I am ready, human Edward. Let us face these cowards who attack from the shadows." As they prepared to move out, the facility's environmental controls began to malfunction. Pockets of extreme heat and cold formed throughout the complex, creating a treacherous labyrinth. "Be careful," Edward warned. "The environment is unstable. We'll need to adapt quickly." They moved through the facility, the red emergency lights casting long shadows. The air shifted erratically from freezing to sweltering as they navigated the corridors. Edward led the way, with Nyota covering their rear and Ellie between them, her scientific knowledge proving useful in predicting the environmental shifts. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of armed individuals in black tactical gear. Edward recognized the insignia on their uniforms. Terran First. "There they are!" one of the operatives shouted. "Take them down!" Edward reacted instantly, pulling Ellie behind cover as Nyota sprang into action. Her Voth reflexes were lightning fast, closing the distance before the humans could properly aim. She disarmed the first operative with a powerful swipe of her tail, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. Edward joined the fray, his combat training meshing seamlessly with Nyota's natural abilities. They moved in perfect sync, a deadly dance of human and Voth. Ellie, not trained for combat, provided crucial support by manipulating the environmental controls of the section they were in, creating disorienting temperature fluctuations that threw off their attackers. As the last operative fell unconscious, Edward heard Ambassador Simpson's voice echo through the facility's communication system. "Attention all personnel, this is Ambassador Simpson. We are mobilizing a joint human-Voth security force to neutralize the threat. Hold your positions and stay calm. Help is on the way." Edward felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew they couldn't wait for rescue. They had to act now to protect the research and stop whatever the Terran First operatives were planning. "We need to get to the central laboratory," Edward said, catching his breath. "That's where the most critical samples are stored. It's likely their primary target." As they made their way towards the lab, they encountered more pockets of resistance. Each confrontation tested their growing teamwork, with Edward and Nyota's combat skills, complemented by Ellie's quick thinking and environmental manipulation. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled over the facility's speakers, cold, determined, and filled with contempt. "This is Colonel Kurtz of Terran First," the voice announced. "We will not allow the human race to be corrupted by alien DNA. Surrender now, and we may show mercy." Edward's expression resolute. He had heard of Kurtz, a decorated soldier turned extremist. His presence here indicated that this was no ordinary attack. "We need to stop him," Edward said, his voice tight with perseverance. "He's the key to ending this." As they approached the central laboratory, they found the corridors locked down. Through a window, they could see Neytiri, the fifth Voth female, working frantically at a control panel. "Neytiri," Edward called out, "can you hear us?" She looked up, relief washing over her face. "Edward, I've managed to lock down sections of the complex, but I can't hold them off forever." "Good work," Edward replied. "We need to get to the central lab. Can you open a path for us?" Neytiri nodded, her claws flying over the controls. "I'll do my best, but be careful. Kurtz and his team are closing in on the lab as well." As the doors before them hissed open, Edward turned to his companions. "This is it. We stop them here, or everything we've worked for is lost." With Nyota at his side and Ellie watching their backs, Edward stepped forward, ready to confront Kurtz and defend the future of human-Voth relations. The central laboratory loomed ahead, a crucible where the fate of two species would be decided. As Edward prepared to confront Colonel Kurtz in the central laboratory, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. The floor beneath them buckled, and darkness engulfed them as the emergency lights flickered out. When the dust settled and the backup generators hummed to life, Edward found himself separated from his companions by a wall of debris. "Nyota, Ellie!" he called out, his voice hoarse from the acrid smoke filling the air. "We're here, Edward." Ellie's muffled voice came from the other side of the rubble. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he replied, assessing his surroundings. "Try to find another way around. I'll push forward to the lab." With no time to waste, Edward navigated through the wreckage, his senses on high alert. As he approached the central laboratory, he heard the unmistakable sound of a firefight. Peering through a shattered window, he saw Dr. Thera and her team desperately defending their research against Terran First operatives. In that moment, Ambassador Simpson's voice crackled over the facility's speakers, announcing the arrival of a joint human-Voth security force. Edward knew he had to act fast to protect the vital research and the future it represented. Weeks later, Edward stood in the newly constructed underground complex on the Voth homeworld, marveling at its fortified walls and advanced security systems. The attack by Terran First had only strengthened the purpose of both humans and Voth to continue their collaborative efforts. Dr. Thera approached him, her scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights. "Edward, we're ready to begin the new phase of experiments. The High Council has approved an expansion of the program." Edward nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "How many new participants?" "5 additional human males," Dr. Thera replied, leading him towards the main research hub. "Each paired with 5 Voth females, just like your arrangement." As they entered the hub, Edward saw the familiar faces of his Voth brides-to-be, Zira, Ellie, Nyota, Topol, and Neytiri. Their presence brought a mix of emotions, comfort, excitement, and a growing sense of responsibility. Ambassador Simpson stood at the center of the room, addressing the gathered scientists and participants. "The events of the past weeks have shown us the importance of our work here. The Voth High Council has granted us unprecedented access to resources and support." Edward listened intently as the ambassador outlined the new series of experiments designed to test human Voth adaptability in extreme environments. The first simulation would place them in a high-altitude mountain setting, challenging both species' physiology. As Edward and his Voth partners entered the simulated environment, the thin air immediately made breathing difficult. The cold bit at his exposed skin, and he could see the Voth females shivering, their reptilian bodies struggling to maintain warmth. Hours into the experiment, Edward noticed something extraordinary. When in close proximity to his Voth partners, his breathing became easier, and his body seemed to regulate its temperature more efficiently. Dr. Thera's voice came over the intercom, excitement evident in her tone. "We're seeing remarkable adaptations in both human and Voth physiology," she announced. "Your bodies are working in tandem to overcome the environmental challenges." As the days passed, Edward observed the progress of the other human participants, particularly Marcus Simpson. The young man's genetic compatibility with his Voth partners yielded promising results, leading to successful conceptions in 2 of his mates. This breakthrough, however, brought new complications. Edward overheard heated debates among the Voth scientists, with Dr. Krell's voice rising above the others. These rapid genetic adaptations could lead to a subspecies that might eventually replace pure Voth, Dr. Krell argued, his scales flushing with agitation. "We must proceed with extreme caution." The Voth High Council's response came swiftly. Strict regulations on the experiments and mandated controlled environments for any resulting offspring. Edward felt a pang of unease at this decision, his protective instincts flaring. During a brief respite between experiments, Edward requested a meeting with Ambassador Simpson. They stood in a quiet corner of the facility, their voices low. "Ambassador, I'm concerned about the long-term implications of these experiments," Edward began. "What rights will our children have? Are we creating a new class of beings with no place in either society?" Simpson's face was grave. "You raise valid points, Edward. We're in uncharted territory here. I'm proposing a joint human-Voth oversight committee to address these ethical concerns." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Thera, who burst into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. "Edward, we've made an incredible discovery in your latest genetic samples with Zira. There's a mutation that seems to grant increased disease resistance. It could have enormous medical applications for both our species." As Edward processed this information, he noticed General Soros, the imposing Voth military leader, entering the research hub. The general's presence sent a ripple of tension through the room. "The military is very interested in the potential of these experiments," General Soros announced, his voice carrying authority. "We believe there may be applications for creating enhanced soldiers." Edward felt a chill run down his spine at the general's words. The implications of weaponizing their research were staggering and potentially dangerous. As he looked around the room at his Voth brides, the other human participants, and the mix of excited and concerned scientists, Edward realized the true complexity of their situation. They stood at the precipice of a new era in human-Voth relations, with the potential to reshape the future of both species. The weight of his role in this interspecies endeavor settled heavily on Edward's shoulders. He knew that the coming days would require all of his diplomatic skills, scientific acumen, and growing emotional connections to navigate the challenges ahead. With a deep breath, Edward stepped forward to address the room, ready to face whatever the future held for humans, Voth, and the new life they might create together. As Edward stepped forward to address the room, a chime from the central console interrupted him. Dr. Thera's scaled fingers danced across the holographic interface, her eyes widening as she processed the incoming data. "We have approval," she announced, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "The Joint Human Voth Oversight Committee has been established and has greenlit the next phase of our research." Edward exchanged glances with his Voth partners, sensing the weight of this moment. Ambassador Simpson stepped forward, his posture rigid with the gravity of the situation. "This marks a new era in our collaboration," Simpson said, addressing the assembled group. "The committee will implement stricter protocols while expanding the scope of our program. Dr. Thera, please brief us on the new experimental design." The Voth scientist nodded, activating a large holographic display in the center of the room. A massive geodesic structure materialized before them, its surface shimmering with simulated environments. "Behold the evolutionary biodome," Dr. Thera began, her voice filled with pride. "This state-of-the-art facility will allow us to conduct a revolutionary series of mating experiments aimed at maximizing genetic compatibility between humans and Voth." As Dr. Thera explained the intricacies of the experiment, Edward found himself drawn to the holographic representation. The biodome's interior shifted from a steaming, primordial swamp to arid deserts, lush jungles, and icy tundras. "The environment will evolve in real time, mimicking the developmental paths of both our species," Dr. Thera continued. "This dynamic setting will challenge you to adapt your mating behaviors and physiologies, pushing the boundaries of interspecies compatibility." Edward felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness coursing through him. He glanced at Zira, noticing the subtle flush of her scales, a sign of excitement he had come to recognize. Days later, Edward stood at the entrance of the actual evolutionary biodome, the massive structure looming before him. The airlock hissed open, revealing a world of prehistoric wonder. Steaming pools dotted the landscape, surrounded by towering ferns and primitive conifers. The humid air clung to his skin as he stepped inside, followed closely by his 5 Voth partners. As they ventured deeper into the simulated swamp, Edward noticed the other human participants entering with their Voth mates. Marcus Simpson, in particular, caught his attention. The young man moved with a confidence that belied the strange environment, his Voth partners clustering protectively around him. A low, resonant tone echoed through the biodome, signaling the start of the experiment. Edward felt a surge of primal energy as he turned to his Voth mates. Their eyes gleamed with a mixture of scientific curiosity and instinctual desire. As the days progressed, the environment shifted subtly. The swamp began to recede, giving way to more varied terrain. Edward found himself adapting alongside his Voth partners, their bodies working in concert to navigate the changing landscape. During a particularly intense mating session with Zira, Edward noticed something extraordinary. As their bodies intertwined, he felt a strange resonance, as if their very cells were communicating on a level beyond physical touch. The sensation was both exhilarating and slightly unnerving. Later in the research hub, Dr. Thera confirmed Edward's experience. "We're seeing unprecedented levels of biochemical synchronization between human and Voth partners," she explained, her voice brimming with excitement. "It's as if your bodies are learning to speak each other's biological language." As the experiment continued, news spread of Marcus Simpson's success. 2 of his Voth mates showed clear signs of conception, their bodies already adapting to nurture the developing hybrid embryos. The announcement sent ripples of excitement and concern throughout the research team. Edward couldn't help but feel a twinge of complex emotions at the news. While he was genuinely happy for Marcus, he also felt a strange sense of competition, an instinct to prove his own genetic legacy. As Edward processed these feelings, Dr. Krell burst into the research hub, his scales flushed with agitation. "Have you all lost your minds?" he hissed, waving a data pad. "These hybrids, they're adapting too quickly, too efficiently. They could replace pure Voth within generations." The room erupted into heated debate, with scientists arguing passionately on both sides. Edward noticed General Soros lurking at the edge of the gathering, his eyes gleaming with keen interest. Amidst the chaos, Edward felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see Zira, her expression a mix of concern and persistence. "We need to talk," she said softly, leading him to a quiet corner of the facility. As they spoke in hushed tones, Edward realized the full weight of their situation. They weren't just participants in a scientific experiment. They were potentially the progenitors of a new species, one that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The conversation was interrupted by a facility-wide alert. Ambassador Simpson's voice crackled over the intercom, tense and urgent. "Attention, all personnel. We have detected an unauthorized breach in the facility's security systems. All participants are to report to their designated safe zones immediately." Edward's military instincts kicked in as he quickly assessed the situation. He gathered his Voth partners, noticing the fear and grit in their eyes. As they moved towards their assigned safe zone, Edward caught a glimpse of a group of Voth he didn't recognize, their movements furtive and purposeful. With a sinking feeling, Edward realized that the future they had been working towards was now under threat. The experiments, the potential hybrids, and the delicate balance between human and Voth societies all hung in the balance as the intruders advanced deeper into the facility. Edward squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that the next few hours would test not only their physical abilities, but also the strength of the bonds they had forged across species lines. The true experiment, it seemed, was just beginning. Edward's military instincts kicked into high gear as he processed the gravity of the situation. The intruders were advancing deeper into the facility, threatening everything they had worked for. He quickly surveyed the room, noting the mixture of fear and tenacity on the faces of both human and Voth participants. "Everyone, listen up," Edward called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need to organize and defend this facility. Pair up, human and Voth together. We'll use our combined strengths to our advantage." As the group rapidly formed teams, Edward found himself alongside Nyota, one of his Voth brides. Her warrior caste training made her an ideal partner for the impending conflict. Across the room, he saw Marcus Simpson and Zira huddled together, their expressions grim but resolute. "Marcus, Zira," Edward called out, "I need you two to secure the genetic samples. They're too valuable to lose." Marcus nodded, his heart made. "We're on it," he replied, guiding Zira towards the genetics lab. The facility's advanced security systems sprang to life, a testament to the lessons learned from the Terran first attack. Laser grids crisscrossed corridors, and stun fields shimmered into existence at key junctions. Automated defense drones deployed throughout the complex, their sensors scanning for unauthorized presence. Edward and Nyota moved swiftly through the facility, coordinating with other teams via encrypted comm channels. The once sterile hallways now buzzed with activity as humans and Voth worked side by side, barricading entrances and setting up defensive positions. In the main laboratory, Dr. Thera's fingers flew across the holographic interface, initiating an emergency data upload. "We can't risk losing our research," she explained to T-Paul, who stood guard nearby. "I'm sending everything to a secure off-world server." The sound of distant explosions echoed through the facility as Czar's group breached the outer defenses. Edward and Nyota exchanged a look of understanding before moving to intercept. They reached the central biodome just as Czar and his team approached. The massive geodesic structure loomed before them, its interior a shifting tapestry of environments. Edward's hand hovered over the environmental controls as Czar's group came into view. "Now," Edward whispered. Nyota activated the controls, and the biodome's interior transformed in an instant. The lush jungle flickered and vanished, replaced by a howling Arctic tundra. Czar and his followers stumbled, disoriented by the sudden change. Edward seized the moment, charging forward with Nyota at his side. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, human adaptability complementing Voth strength. Edward ducked under a swipe from one attacker, allowing Nyota to use his back as a springboard to launch herself at another. As they fought, the biodome's environment continued to shift rapidly. Arid desert gave way to steamy swamp, then to rocky mountain terrain. Each change forced Czar's group to readjust, giving Edward and Nyota a crucial advantage. In the genetics lab, Marcus and Zira faced their own battle. Marcus used his intimate knowledge of the facility to lead a group of attackers into a prepared ambush. As stun rounds filled the air, Zira stepped forward, her voice calm but forceful. "Brothers, sisters," she called out to the Voth attackers. "This violence serves no one. We seek only to understand, to grow. Is that not the way of science, the path to enlightenment our ancestors set us upon?" Her words gave some of the attackers pause, creating division in their ranks. Marcus seized the opportunity, disarming several while they hesitated. The tide of the battle seemed to turn as Dr. Krell arrived, his presence commanding respect even among the supremacists. "This is madness," he declared, his voice booming through the corridors. "We are Voth. We do not destroy knowledge, even that which challenges us." As the fighting began to subside, Edward made his way to Dr. Thera, an idea forming in his mind. "The neural link technology," he said, slightly out of breath. "Could we use it to end this peacefully?" Dr. Thera's eyes widened. "It's untested for this purpose, but yes, it might work. The risks are worth it," Edward finished. He turned to Nyota and two other Voth females nearby. "Will you join me?" Their affirmative responses were immediate and unwavering. Minutes later, Edward felt the cool touch of electrodes on his temples. The familiar hum of the neural link equipment filled his ears. As Dr. Thera initiated the link, Edward gasped. His consciousness expanded, intertwining with those of his Voth partners. Memories, instincts, and emotions flowed between them like a rushing river. With this new shared perspective, Edward and his link team moved to confront Czar. Their movements were fluid, almost dance-like in their coordination. They anticipated each attack, countered each strategy, their combined minds processing information at an unprecedented rate. Czar, faced with this display of perfect human-Voth cooperation, faltered. His followers, already demoralized, began to lay down their weapons. The battle was over almost before it began. As the last of the attackers were secured, Edward felt the neural link fade. He stumbled slightly, caught by Nyota's strong arms. The experience left him shaken but exhilarated. He could still feel echoes of the connection, a deep understanding that transcended species barriers. Dr. Thera approached, her eyes shining with excitement. "The data from the link, it's extraordinary. This could change everything we thought we knew about compatibility." Before Edward could respond, Ambassador Simpson burst into the room, slightly out of breath. "The Voth High Council," he announced. "They want to expand the program, a new research colony on a neutral planet. They're calling for volunteers to live there, to explore the full potential of human-Voth cooperation." Edward looked around the room, at the humans and Voth who had fought side by side, at his brides who had shared his mind. He felt a surge of hope for the future, a future that now seemed brighter and more interconnected than ever before. As the facility buzzed with the news of the upcoming expansion, Edward knew that their work was far from finished. The next phase of the experiment loomed on the horizon, promising new challenges and discoveries. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Edward felt truly prepared to face it, not as a human among Voth, but as part of something entirely new. New, uniquely intertwined. The future they had fought for was now within reach, waiting to be shaped by their combined efforts. In the months that followed, Edward found himself at the heart of a whirlwind of activity. The Voth High Council's decision to expand the program set in motion a flurry of preparations for the new research colony on Novus Prime. Edward, along with his 5 Voth brides and the other human Voth couples, formed the core of this groundbreaking experiment in interspecies cohabitation. As their shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Novus Prime, Edward pressed his hand against the viewport, taking in the alien landscape below. The planet's surface was a tapestry of deep purple vegetation and shimmering silver lakes, unlike anything he had seen before. Beside him, Zira's eyes widened with wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The colony itself was a marvel of combined human and Voth engineering. Geodesic domes dotted the landscape, each housing adaptive environments that catered to both species' needs. Edward marveled at the seamless integration of Voth biotechnology and human innovation as they toured their new home. Dr. Thera's research into the neural link technology yielded remarkable results in the following weeks. Edward and his Voth brides volunteered for regular sessions, their minds melding in ways that pushed the boundaries of their understanding. During one such session, Edward gasped as a flood of sensations washed over him. He felt the subtle shifts in Nyota's body temperature, the rhythm of Zira's heartbeat, the complex chemical signals coursing through Topol's system. As the link faded, Dr. Thera's eyes shone with excitement. "The data is extraordinary," she explained, her fingers flying over a holographic display. "Repeated use of the link between bonded pairs is not only enhancing genetic compatibility, but also accelerating the development of hybrid traits in offspring." The implications of her words sank in as Edward watched a group of children playing in one of the colony's communal areas. Among them were the first wave of human Voth hybrids, born to Marcus Simpson and two of his Voth mates. The children displayed unprecedented cognitive abilities, solving complex puzzles with ease and communicating in ways that left their caretakers astounded. Weeks later, Edward stood in the medical bay, his hand intertwined with Zira's as Dr. Thera conducted a routine scan. The doctor's expression shifted from concentration to surprise, then to joy. "Congratulations," she said, turning the screen towards them. "You're pregnant." Edward's heart raced as he stared at the tiny form on the screen. He and Zira had been the first to conceive using the refined neural link method, and now their child grew rapidly within her, showing signs of advanced development. As the pregnancy progressed, Edward found his relationships with his other Voth brides deepening in unexpected ways. Each connection became unique and complementary to his evolving identity as a bridge between species. Nyota's warrior spirit tempered his own military instincts, while Topol's scientific curiosity pushed him to explore new intellectual horizons. The colony faced its first major challenge 4 months into Zira's pregnancy. Alarms blared throughout the complex as sensors detected an approaching cosmic storm, its energy readings off the charts. "The storm will destabilize our atmosphere if it hits," Dr. Krell explained grimly, his scales flushed with concern. "We need to deploy the planetary shield, but our systems aren't fully integrated yet." Edward stepped forward, his mind already formulating a plan. "We can do this," he said, looking around at the assembled team of humans and Voth. "But we'll need to work together like never before." What followed was a daring operation that pushed the limits of their cooperation. Edward led a diverse team to the shield generator complex, their movements synchronized through years of shared experiences and the lingering effects of the neural link technology. As the storm raged overhead, human hands worked in perfect harmony with Voth appendages, connecting circuits, and calibrating field generators. Edward felt a surge of pride as he watched Marcus deftly manipulate Voth biotech components, while Nyota's strength proved crucial in stabilizing the power core. With seconds to spare, the planetary shield flickered to life. The colony held its collective breath as the cosmic storm crashed against the barrier. Flashes of brilliant energy rippled across the shield, but it held firm. As the danger passed, cheers erupted throughout the complex, humans and Voth embracing in celebration of their shared victory. The success of the shield operation became a symbol of what their two species could achieve together. It sparked a new wave of innovation and collaboration throughout the colony, with mixed teams tackling challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. As Zira's due date approached, an air of excitement and anticipation filled the colony. Dr. Thera had detected an anomaly in the fetus, neural structures so advanced they defied their most optimistic projections. The impending birth drew the attention of medical experts from both human and Voth worlds, all eager to witness this landmark event. The day of the birth arrived with unexpected swiftness. Edward rushed Zira to the medical bay, his other brides close behind, offering support and encouragement. As labor intensified, Edward activated the neural link, determined to share this experience with Zira fully. The connection bloomed between them, and suddenly Edward felt everything: the pain, the exertion, the primal drive to bring new life into the world. Their minds and bodies moved in perfect sync, each contraction a shared ordeal. Hours passed in a blur of sensation and effort. Finally, with one last push, their child entered the world. The room fell silent for a moment before a strong, clear cry filled the air. "It's a girl," Dr. Thera announced, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the infant on Zira's chest. Edward gazed down at his daughter, overwhelmed by a love so profound it threatened to stop his heart. Her skin was a soft blend of human and Voth tones, her eyes large and alert, taking in the world around her with an intensity that belied her newborn state. "Aurora," Zira whispered, looking up at Edward. "Her name is Aurora." Edward nodded, understanding the perfect symbolism of the name. As he cradled his daughter, surrounded by his Voth brides and the friends who had become family, Edward knew that Aurora's birth marked more than just a personal milestone. She was the dawn of a new era for both their species, a living bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. As news of Aurora's birth spread through the colony, a wave of optimism swept through both human and Voth populations. The success of Edward and Zira's union, and the healthy arrival of their hybrid child, sparked a new round of human Voth pregnancies throughout the colony. Edward watched with pride and amazement as Aurora grew, her development outpacing all expectations. By her first birthday, she was already speaking in complete sentences, her mind a remarkable blend of human creativity and Voth analytical prowess. As the years passed, Edward's family expanded. Each of his Voth brides bore him children, each hybrid child displaying a unique combination of traits that pushed the boundaries of what they thought possible. The colony thrived, becoming a beacon of hope for human-Voth relations across the galaxy. 5 years after the colony's establishment, Edward stood on a stage beside his family, watching as Aurora, now a precocious 5-year-old, addressed a gathering of human and Voth dignitaries. Her words, wise beyond her years, were broadcast across both species' territories. "We are not simply human, nor are we simply Voth," Aurora said, her voice clear and confident. "We are something new, something more. We are the future, born from the best of both worlds." As applause filled the air, Edward looked out over the colony he had helped create. The lights of their home shimmered against the alien sky, a testament to the power of adaptability, cooperation, and love. He knew that their story, the story of human Voth unity, was just the beginning. In fact, it was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.